Ambitious family took over the farmer's ranch until the dog discovered something hidden in the yard. William Peterson watched his own land through the wire fence that now separated him from the farm where he had been born. His trembling hands held the papers that had changed his life in a matter of days, documents claiming impossible debts and property transfers he didn't remember authorizing. The Thompson family had moved into his house the previous week, bringing moving trucks and an air of legitimate ownership that made William's stomach churn. The patriarch, Richard Thompson, was a man in his mid-40s, with graying hair slicked back and a smile that never reached his eyes. His wife, Margaret, an elegant woman of 40, walked along the porch as if she had always lived there. The couple's 2 children, 22-year-old Brian and 19-year-old Christine, seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation, avoiding William's gaze whenever they crossed paths. "Joke, come here, boy," called William, and the golden mixed-breed dog ran to him, wagging its tail enthusiastically. Duke had been found as a puppy by William's brother Anthony, who had passed away 3 years earlier. The animal had always been clever, but in recent days it had been restless, constantly sniffing around the main house's yard and whining softly, as if sensing something humans couldn't perceive. William now lived in a small wooden house at the back of the property, a room that had previously been used for storing tools, and which the Thompsons had generously allowed him to occupy. The irony of the situation consumed him inside. At 72 years old, after working that land for over 5 decades, he was reduced to a tenant on his own property. "Your father was always too trusting," he murmured to Duke, who looked at him with those brown eyes full of loyalty. "Anthony handled the papers, I handled the land. Now look where that got me." The dog barked once, as if agreeing, and ran toward the yard where Richard was supervising the construction of new pig facilities. William sighed and followed him, keeping a respectful distance. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "Mr. William," called Richard, waving his hand. "Come here. I need to speak with you." William approached slowly, Duke sticking close to his legs. Richard was dressed in new jeans and a plaid shirt, trying to look like a farmer, but his dress shoes gave away his urban origins. "We were thinking of making some improvements to the yard," said Richard, gesturing to the open space between the main house and the old animal facilities. "We're going to build a recreation area here. A pool, perhaps." William's heart tightened. That yard had been the center of the Peterson family's life for generations. There his mother, Mrs. Ellen, had raised chickens and ducks. There he and Anthony had played as children. There he had proposed to his late wife, Mary Helen. "With all due respect, Mr. Richard," said William, choosing his words carefully, "this yard has always been preserved by the family. It has history, you know." "History doesn't pay the bills, Mr. William," Richard retorted with a forced smile. "And now the property is ours, legally speaking." Duke began sniffing the ground more intensely, walking in circles in a specific area of the yard. The behavior caught William's attention, who knew the animal's habits well. "What is it, Duke?" he asked, crouching down. The dog began digging with its front paws, something it rarely did without reason. William became intrigued. Duke was an intelligent animal, almost as if it understood things that humans didn't perceive. "Get that animal out of there," ordered Richard, visibly irritated. "I don't want holes in my yard." But Duke kept digging more and more frantically. Margaret came out of the house, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on?" she asked, drying her hands on a dish towel. "The dog is digging in the yard," replied Richard. "William, control this animal." William grabbed Duke by the collar, but the dog resisted, pulling toward the spot he was digging. It was completely atypical behavior. "Let him dig," said a young voice. Everyone turned to see Brian, the eldest son of the Thompsons, approaching. The young man had dark hair and a thoughtful air that contrasted with his father's authoritative posture. "What do you mean, let him dig?" asked Richard, frowning. "Dad, the dog must be sensing something. Animals have instincts we don't have," said Brian, looking at Duke with curiosity. "There might be something buried there." Christine, the youngest daughter, also approached. She was a pretty young woman with wavy brown hair tied in a ponytail, and her eyes held the same thoughtful expression as her brother's. Brian is right, she said. In college, I studied animal behavior. Dogs can detect things that go unnoticed by us. Richard seemed displeased, but Margaret interceded. What harm could it do, she said. If the dog wants to dig, let him dig. He might find something interesting. William released Duke, who immediately resumed digging with even more energy. Within minutes, his paws touched something solid. The metallic sound made everyone gather around. There's something here, said William, kneeling beside Duke. Carefully, he began digging with his hands, removing the loose dirt that Duke had turned over. Soon the corner of what appeared to be a metal box appeared. My God, murmured Margaret. What could that be? Richard was visibly tense, pacing back and forth as William worked to unearth the object. Brian and Christine helped, grabbing shovels from the barn. After about half an hour of work, they managed to pull out a metal box the size of a small suitcase. It was rusty, but still well preserved. It had an old padlock that gave way easily when William forced it with a screwdriver. Careful, said Christine. There might be something dangerous inside. William slowly opened the box. Inside were documents wrapped in plastic, some old photos, and what appeared to be a sealed letter. They're papers, he said, carefully picking up the first envelope. Richard quickly approached, trying to see the contents. Must be old stuff, unimportant, he said, but his voice was strained. William opened the first document. It was a property deed dated 1987, but with details he had never seen before. His name was there, as was Anthony's, but there was a specific clause that caught his attention. In case of attempted fraudulent transfer of the property, he read aloud, this document serves as proof of the true intention of the legitimate owners. The silence that followed was heavy. Richard was pale. That doesn't mean anything, he said, trying to maintain composure. Old documents, no legal value. But William kept reading. The document was detailed, explaining that Anthony had created this safeguard after discovering someone was trying to forge property documents. There's more, said William, picking up another paper. It was a handwritten letter from Anthony himself, addressed to William, explaining his suspicions about attempted fraud and the measures he had taken to protect the family. My dear brother, began William, his voice choked, if you are reading this letter, it means my suspicions were confirmed. Someone is trying to take our land through fake documents. I kept here the evidence you'll need to get back what's ours. Margaret held her husband's arm, who was visibly upset. Richard, what does this mean? She asked. It means nothing, he replied, but his voice was shaky. They're old documents. They might be forgeries. Brian approached William. May I see? He asked respectfully. William handed the papers to the young man, who examined them carefully. Brian was in his last year of law and had enough knowledge to understand the importance of what he was seeing. Father, he said, turning to Richard, these documents seem legitimate, and they indicate that— I don't care what they indicate, Richard cut in abruptly. This property is ours, period. Christine, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Father, maybe we should talk about this at home. There's nothing to talk about, said Richard, but his voice came out louder than necessary. Duke, who had observed the whole scene, went back to sniffing the yard. He started digging again in another spot, about 3 meters from where they had found the first box. He's digging again, Brian observed. There must be something else buried, said Christine. Richard tried to intervene. Enough digging for today. Let's go inside. But William was too intrigued to stop. If Anthony had buried one box, he might have buried others. Duke's behavior suggested there were more secrets under that yard. Excuse me, said William, heading to the new spot Duke had indicated. This time the digging was faster. Soon they found another box, smaller than the first, but equally well preserved. Inside were more documents, including copies of the original signatures of William and Anthony, which clearly differed from the signatures on the documents that transferred the property to the Thompsons. This is proof of forgery, said Brian, examining the papers. Richard was growing increasingly agitated. You don't understand, he said. This property was being lost to debts. We saved it from going to auction. What debts? Asked William. I never had debts I couldn't pay. Your brother's debts, replied Richard. Anthony owed a lot of money. My brother never told me about any debt, said William. Margaret approached her husband, clearly worried. Richard, you told me you had bought this property legally. And I did, he insisted. All the documents are in order. Brian picked up one of the papers from the second box. Father, this document shows that the debts you mentioned were paid in 1995. There were no outstanding debts. Richard's embarrassment was evident. He looked from side to side like a cornered animal. You don't understand the situation, he said finally. This property was abandoned. William couldn't maintain it. Abandoned? William stood up, outraged. I work this land every day. How can it be abandoned? Christine, who had been watching the argument with growing discomfort, finally spoke. Father, I think you owe us an explanation. Richard took a deep breath, clearly struggling with his own contradictions. All right, he said. Maybe I wasn't completely honest about how we acquired this property. Margaret stared at him in shock. What do you mean, not completely honest? I knew Anthony, Richard confessed. I worked with him a few years ago, when I provided accounting services for small farmers in the area. The revelation fell like a bomb. William felt his legs go weak. You knew my brother? Yes, I did, said Richard, avoiding everyone's gaze. And when he died, I knew you'd be left alone, not understanding much about paperwork. Richard, exclaimed Margaret. What did you do? I might have taken advantage of the situation, he admitted, the words coming out with difficulty. Brian and Christine exchanged glances, horrified. Dad, are you saying you deceived Mr. William? Asked Brian. It wasn't quite like that, tried to explain Richard. I offered to buy the property for a fair price. Fair? William was incredulous. You told me I owed money, that if I didn't sell I would lose everything. You did owe, insisted Richard, but his voice was becoming less convincing. Christine picked up one of the documents from the box. Dad, it's proven here that there were no debts. You lied to him. And lied to us too, added Brian. You told us you had bought this property normally. Margaret was visibly shaken. Richard, I can't believe you did this, deceiving an elderly gentleman. It wasn't like that, protested Richard. I offered him an opportunity, some money to live peacefully in New York. What money? Asked William. You gave me a pittance, saying it was all the land was worth after deducting the debts. Duke returned to sniffing the yard, but this time headed near the house's porch. There he began digging again, with the same energy as before. He's finding something else, observed Christine. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take the opportunity to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot who are just starting out, now continuing. Everyone headed to the new spot. The excavation revealed a third box, this one larger than the previous ones. When they opened it, they found not only documents but also some jewelry that had belonged to William and Anthony's mother, plus cash, carefully wrapped in plastic. Oh my, murmured Margaret. There was a treasure buried here. It's not a treasure, said William, delicately picking up a pearl necklace he recognized immediately. It's my mother's jewelry. Anthony kept them here for protection. Among the documents in this third box was something even more revealing, a detailed record of all the conversations Anthony had had with Richard, including dates and topics discussed. My brother suspected you from the start, said William, reading the notes. He knew you were planning something. Brian took the notebook from William's hands. Dad, everything is recorded here. Every time you visited Anthony, what you talked about, the questions you asked about the property documentation. Richard was cornered. There was no longer any way to deny the evidence. All right, he said, his voice defeated. Maybe I planned this for a while. Maybe. Margaret was furious. Richard, you planned to steal land from an elderly gentleman. It wasn't theft, he defended himself weakly. It was a business opportunity. An opportunity based on lies and forgery, said Brian, clearly disappointed with his father. Christine was reading another document from the box. Dad, here it says that you forged documents to create non-existent debts in Anthony's name. And here, added Brian, picking up another paper, there's a copy of your real signature, Mr. William, compared with the forgery on the sale documents. William examined the signatures. The difference was striking. How had he been so naive as not to notice? "I trusted you," he said to Richard. "You came here after Anthony's funeral, offering help, saying you were his friend." "I was his friend," murmured Richard. "Friend?" William was indignant. "Friends don't do this to friends." Margaret approached William. "Mr. William, I didn't know anything about this. If I had known—" "I know, Mrs. Margaret," said William, who had always been a kind man. "You seem to be a good person. It's not your fault." "But it's my fault for having married a man capable of this," she said, looking at Richard with contempt. Brian and Christine were visibly embarrassed. Their entire lives they had respected their father, and now they discovered he was capable of committing fraud against defenseless people. "Father," said Brian, "you need to return this property to Mr. William." "And how am I supposed to return it?" asked Richard, desperate. "I've already spent the money left over from the sale of our previous house. We have nowhere to go." "You should have thought of that before committing the fraud," said Christine. Duke, who had remained quiet during the argument, went back to sniffing the yard. This time he headed near the barn where William's old tools were kept. "He's finding something else," said William, following the dog. The fourth excavation revealed something different, a much larger wooden box buried deeper. When they managed to remove it, they discovered it was full of documents related not only to the Peterson property, but also to other properties in the area. "What is all this?" asked Margaret. William examined the papers. They were records of other rural properties with notes from Anthony about similar fraud attempts. "My brother was investigating other similar situations," he said. "It seems you're not the only one, Richard." Brian picked up some of the documents. "Father, there are records here of at least 5 other properties where similar fraud attempts occurred. And the name Richard Thompson appears in several of them," added Christine. Richard was pale as a ghost. "This proves nothing," he murmured. "It proves you made a business out of this," said William. "How many families did you deceive, Richard?" I needed to make a living," he said, in a desperate attempt at justification. "Making a living by deceiving elderly people," said Margaret, clearly disgusted. The situation was getting increasingly tense. Richard realized there was no way to escape the truth anymore. His lies had been exposed unequivocally. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, defeated. "First, return our property," said William, "and second, take responsibility for what you did," added Brian. Christine was examining another set of documents. "Father, here's a list of all the people you deceived, with addresses and details of what you did to each one." "Anthony was building a case against you," said William. "If he hadn't died, you would have been exposed long ago." "Why do you think he died?" asked Richard, in a desperate attempt to divert attention. "My brother died of a heart attack," replied William. "The doctor confirmed it, and you were at the funeral, remember? Playing the part of the concerned friend." Margaret shook her head, disbelieving. "I can't believe I married someone like this." "Mother," said Christine, "maybe we should think about separating from him." "Christine," exclaimed Richard, "I'm your father." "A father who taught his children values he doesn't follow himself," retorted Brian. Duke went back to sniffing, this time heading to a corner of the yard near the abandoned chicken coop. He seemed tireless in his search. "There's something else," said William, following the dog once more. The 5th box contained something surprising: cassette tape recordings carefully labeled with dates and names. "Anthony recorded conversations," said William, examining the tapes. "Is that legal?" asked Margaret. "If the conversations happened on his property, yes," replied Brian. "He had the right to record. One of the tapes was labeled Richard Thompson, Confession." William held it with trembling hands. "There's a tape here with your confession, Richard." "That's impossible," said Richard, but his voice was completely without conviction. "Shall we listen?" suggested Christine. William had a small tape recorder in the barn, a relic from the 80s that still worked. He inserted the tape and pressed play. Anthony's voice came through first, clear and firm. "This is a conversation with Richard Thompson, March 15th, 2022. Richard, can you repeat what you just told me about your plans for our property?" Then Richard's voice. "Anthony, when you die, your brother won't be able to keep this land. He doesn't understand paperwork, doesn't know how to deal with banks. It'll be easy to convince him to sell for a fraction of its real value." Anthony continued, And you already have the documents prepared? I have everything ready. I created some debts in your name, nothing you'll discover while you're alive. When you're gone, I'll present these debts to William and offer to buy the property to help him pay them off. The silence that followed was deafening. The confession was clear and unambiguous. Margaret had tears in her eyes. Richard, how could you? And on top of that, planning to take advantage of Anthony's death. I was drunk when I said that, Richard tried to explain. Drunk or not, you confessed to a fraud scheme, said Brian. The recording continued. Richard, you know this is a crime, don't you? Anthony, business is business. Your brother will be better off in New York with the money I'll give him, and I'll put this land to good use. You mean you'll speculate with it? Of course. This area will appreciate a lot in the coming years. When I resell, I'll make at least 10 times what I paid William. William turned off the recorder, unable to listen anymore. 10 times, he murmured. You were going to make 10 times what you paid me. William, let me explain, Richard tried. There's no explanation for this, said William. His voice choked. You planned to rob me even before my brother died. Christine was crying. Dad, I can't believe you're that kind of person. Daughter, everyone makes mistakes. A mistake is forgetting to buy bread, said Brian. This is premeditated crime. Duke started getting restless again, sniffing near the main house. His persistence was impressing everyone. How many boxes is this dog going to find? Asked Margaret. The 6th excavation revealed something different, a box containing documents that weren't Anthony's, but from other people in the area. These are deeds to other properties, said William, examining the papers. Papers that Anthony obtained somehow, added Brian. Among the documents were letters from other victims of Richard, people who had discovered too late that they had been cheated. Dad, said Christine, reading one of the letters, here a lady says you convinced her to sell her ranch because it was full of fake debts. And here another elderly man who lost his family property to you, added Brian. William sat on a rock, visibly shaken. How many people did you cheat, Richard? I don't remember exactly. You don't remember? Margaret was outraged. How can you not remember how many people you robbed? The discovery of the other victims completely changed the dynamics of the situation. It was no longer just about William's property, but about a systematic fraud scheme. Anthony was gathering evidence against you, said William. He was going to report you. But he died before he could, murmured Richard. Died of what exactly? Asked Brian, a suspicion rising in his voice. Of a heart attack, William answered quickly. The doctor confirmed it. It was natural. Are you sure? Insisted Brian. Absolutely, said William. Anthony had heart problems for years. He took medication and everything. Duke started sniffing again, this time heading near the old fence that divided the property from a neighbor's. There he began digging again. He doesn't stop, observed Christine. The 7th box contained something nobody expected. Money. So much money. My God, murmured Margaret. Where did all this come from? William examined the bills. They were considerable amounts, carefully organized and packaged. Anthony kept the money from the last harvest sales here, he said. I always suspected he had money hidden somewhere. How much is there? Asked Brian. William started counting. It was over $50,000, a fortune for a small farmer. With this money, you wouldn't need to sell the property to anyone, said Christine. Exactly, confirmed William. If I had known this money existed, I would never have believed your lies about debts, Richard. Richard was completely defeated. All his lies had been exposed, and now it was clear that his victim had enough resources to keep the property. What are you going to do with me? He asked, his voice almost inaudible. First, you're going to return our property, said William. And then, you're going to repay all the other people you deceived, added Brian. But I don't have money for that, protested Richard. Then you'll have to get it, said Margaret. Even if you have to work the rest of your life to pay it back. Christine was examining more documents from the last box. Dad, here's a list with the current addresses of all the people you deceived. Anthony was planning to contact them, said William, to form a group to report you formally. The revelation of the multiple victims had turned the situation into something much bigger than a simple property dispute. It was a case of systematic fraud that had ruined several families. Duke, tireless, went back to sniffing the yard. This time he headed near the artesian well that supplied the property. "He's still finding things," said Brian. The 8th excavation was the most surprising of all. The box contained not only documents, but also personal items that had belonged to Richard's other victims. "These are jewels and documents from other families," said William, examining the contents. "Things Anthony managed to recover somehow," added Christine. Among the items was a letter addressed to the competent authorities, in which Anthony detailed Richard's entire scheme and provided evidence of his frauds. "Your brother was building a solid case against you, Richard," said Brian. "And if he hadn't died, you would have been in jail long ago," added Margaret. William held the letter with trembling hands. Reading his deceased brother's words was emotionally devastating, but also liberating. Anthony had been wiser and braver than he had imagined. "My brother William is a good and honest man," he read aloud, "but also too trusting. I know that when I die, Richard will try to deceive him. That's why I'm leaving all this evidence buried in the yard, hoping that one day the truth will be discovered." "He knew you would try to deceive me," said William to Richard. "And left traps to protect you," added Brian. Duke finally stopped sniffing and lay down at William's feet, as if his mission was finally accomplished. The dog had found 8 buried boxes, each revealing more aspects of Richard's scheme. "Anthony trained Duke to do this," said William, petting the dog. "He knew Duke would help me when necessary." "How do you mean trained?" asked Margaret. "My brother was always clever with animals," explained William. "He must have taught Duke to sniff these specific locations." The discovery of the 8 boxes had revealed a complete picture of Richard's criminal activities. There was no longer any way to deny or minimize what he had done. "Now what are we going to do with all this?" asked Christine. "First, Richard will sign the documents returning the property to Mr. William," said Brian. "And then we'll contact all the other victims," added Christine. "And if they want, they can seek justice," concluded Margaret. Richard was completely defeated. He knew there was no way out anymore. "All right," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'll return the property." "And the other families?" asked William. I'll try to compensate everyone," promised Richard, though he knew it would be impossible. Brian picked up some of the documents. "I'll help organize all of this. As a law student, I can guide the victims about their rights." "And I'll help too," said Christine. "It's the least I can do to make up for what my father did." Margaret approached William. "Mr. William, I'm so sorry for all of this. If I could undo it." "Mrs. Margaret, you're not to blame," said William kindly. "You were also deceived by him." "But now I need to decide what to do about my marriage," she said, looking at Richard with sadness and anger. The situation had become much bigger than a simple property dispute. It was a family drama that was destroying the Thompsons from within. "Father," said Brian, "I don't know if I can forgive you for this." "Neither can I," added Christine. "You taught us to be honest, and now we find out you're a criminal." Richard tried to approach his children. "Children, I did this for you, to give the family a better life." "Lies," said Brian. "You did it out of greed." "A better life based on other people's suffering," added Christine. The sun was beginning to set and the yard was covered in holes and turned earth. The 8 boxes were lined up, each containing devastating evidence against Richard. "What are we going to do with all of this today?" asked Margaret. "First, we'll store all the documents and evidence in a safe place," said William. "And tomorrow we start contacting the other victims," added Brian. "Richard, you'll come with me to the registry office to sign the property return," said William. "And if you try to run or hide, we have all the evidence needed to find you," warned Brian. Christine was organizing the documents by affected family. "There are at least 15 different families," she said. "Some lost everything because of him." The magnitude of Richard's frauds was becoming increasingly clear. He had destroyed entire lives with his lies and forgeries. "How do you sleep at night?" Margaret asked her husband. I always justified it by saying I was putting the land to better use," Richard replied weakly. "Better use?" William was outraged. "This land has been in my family for 3 generations. And you were going to speculate with it, not use it for farming." added Brian. Duke got up and walked over to William, resting his head on his leg. The dog seemed to understand that his mission had been successfully completed. "Thank you, Duke," said William, petting the animal. "You were a good boy today." "Without Duke, we would never have discovered all of this," observed Christine. "Anthony knew what he was doing when he trained this dog," said William, his eyes moist. Night was falling, and the Thompson family needed to make important decisions about their future. "Where are we going to live after we return the house?" asked Christine. "I don't know," admitted Margaret. "We spent all our savings buying this property." "With stolen money," Brian reminded them. "You can stay in the back room for now," offered William, surprising everyone. "Mr. William!" exclaimed Margaret. "After everything my husband did." "You and the children aren't to blame for his crimes," said William, "and everyone needs a roof over their heads." The generosity of William left Richard even more ashamed. Even after being robbed and deceived, the old farmer was offering help to the one who had wronged him. "I don't deserve this kindness," murmured Richard. "No, you don't," agreed Brian. "But your family deserves a chance to start over." Christine was moved by William's attitude. "You're a much better person than my father," she said. "Don't compare yourself to me, girl," said William. "Everyone is who they are. What matters is learning from mistakes and trying to be better." "Will the other families be able to recover their properties?" asked Margaret. "Some might, others might not," replied Brian. "But at least now they know the truth and can try to seek justice." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The discovery of Richard's frauds had created a complex situation affecting multiple families. William knew the coming days would be difficult, but felt relieved to finally know the truth. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight," said William. "Tomorrow, you'll move to the back room and I'll return to my house." "Your house," repeated Margaret. "You're right. This was always your house." Richard remained silent, knowing anything he said would only worsen his situation. His family was shattered, his reputation ruined, and he faced the prospect of spending years trying to repair the damage he had caused. "Dad, you have to understand that our lives were also destroyed today," said Christine. "I know," murmured Richard, "and I'm sorry for that." "Being sorry won't undo what you did," replied Brian. "But it's a start," said William, always trying to see the good in people. Duke walked through the yard, sniffing once more. But this time he seemed satisfied, as if he knew he had found everything he needed to find. "Do you think there's anything else buried?" asked Christine. "I don't think so," replied William. "Duke seems calm now." The family parted for the night, each absorbing the weight of the day's revelations. William slept in the barn, dreaming of his brother Anthony and feeling grateful for the wisdom and foresight he had shown. The next morning, William woke to Duke barking in the yard. The dog was agitated again, but this time he wasn't digging. He was barking at someone approaching the property. "Who could it be?" murmured William, stepping out of the barn. It was a woman around 60, well-dressed, accompanied by a younger man who seemed to be her son. "Good morning," said the woman. "Are you William Peterson?" "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "My name is Helen Carter. I heard that you discovered documents related to rural property frauds." William felt his stomach tighten. How could she know about yesterday's discoveries? "How did you find out about this?" "I know one of the families harmed by Richard Thompson," explained Helen, "and I came here because I suspect he deceived me too." Helen's arrival confirmed that Richard's frauds were even more extensive than they had imagined. William invited her inside, also calling the Thompsons to join the conversation. "Mrs. Helen," said William, "what happened to you?" Helen told her story. 3 years ago, Richard had convinced her late husband to sell a small ranch in the region, claiming non-existent debts and offering a very low price. "My husband was sick with cancer," she explained. "Richard showed up saying we were friends of you, the Peterson brothers, and that you had recommended him as an honest accountant." William was outraged. "He used our name to deceive you?" "Yes, he did." "She said you had recommended him as a trustworthy person to help with the ranch paperwork." Richard was visibly embarrassed, but Helen hadn't finished. After my husband died, I discovered the ranch had been resold for 10 times the price Richard paid us. Just like what he was going to do to me, said William. Brian and Christine were listening to everything in silence, increasingly ashamed of their father. Mrs. Helen, said Brian, we found documents yesterday that may help you recover your property. Really? She asked, hopeful. William showed her the documents related to her case. Among the evidence left by Anthony were detailed records of the fraud against the Carter family. My brother wrote everything down, said William. He knew Richard had used our name to deceive you. Helen began to cry. If I had known this earlier. My husband died feeling guilty for losing the family land. The situation was becoming increasingly dramatic. Richard's frauds had caused not only financial losses, but also deep emotional suffering. Mrs. Helen, you can sue whoever bought your ranch, said Brian. If the purchase was based on fraud, it can be annulled. But it will be a long fight, warned Christine. I'd rather fight than do nothing, said Helen determinedly. Helen's son, who had remained silent, finally spoke. My mother never accepted the loss of the ranch. It was her and my father's lifelong dream. And now you may have a chance to reclaim that dream, said William. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more people. 2 cars stopped at the property entrance, and from each emerged an elderly couple. More people, observed Margaret. Duke began to bark, but in a friendly way. The dog seemed to recognize that these people posed no threat. Good morning, said one of the men approaching the group. We are the Fishers. We came here because we heard evidence against Richard Thompson had been found. The other couple introduced themselves as the Smiths. Both families had been victims of Richard in previous years. How did you find out so quickly? Asked William. New York is small, explained Mr. Fisher. News like this spreads fast. And we were already organizing to try to do something about him, added Mrs. Smith. The arrival of multiple victims turned the yard into an impromptu courtroom. Each family told their story, and all were similar. Richard had taken advantage of elderly people's trust to steal their properties. How many families did you deceive? Asked William to Richard. I don't know exactly, he murmured. How can you not know? Exploded Mr. Fisher. You destroyed our lives. Calm down, Mr. Fisher, intervened William. Let's resolve this in a civilized manner. Brian picked up the documents found in the boxes. Here are records of at least 20 different families, he said. 20 families, exclaimed Helen. Imagine how many people were harmed. The magnitude of the frauds was impressive. Richard had operated for years, systematically deceiving vulnerable rural families. What are we going to do now? Asked Mrs. Smith. First, we need to organize all the information, said Brian. Then each family can decide how they want to proceed. I want my ranch back, said Mr. Fisher determinedly. And I do too, added Helen. Christine was examining the specific documents for each family. Some cases may be easier to resolve than others, she said. It depends on when the fraud happened and if it's still possible to annul the sale. But everyone deserves justice, said William. The discussion was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle. This time it was a man alone, looking nervous, who seemed to recognize Richard. Richard, he shouted, getting out of the car. You owe me an explanation. Who is that? Asked Margaret. It's Michael, replied Richard, visibly worried. A business partner. Michael approached the group clearly agitated. Business partner? He said sarcastically. You sold me a property with fake documentation. The situation was getting more and more complex. Richard hadn't just deceived the original victims, but also the buyers of the properties. What fake documentation? Asked Brian. He sold me the Carter Ranch, explained Michael, pointing at Helen. Now I found out the original sale was fraudulent. Helen stood up, staring at Michael. So you're the one on my ranch. I paid for it, Michael defended himself. I didn't know it was the result of fraud. The tension was rising. Now it wasn't just a matter between Richard and his victims, but also between the victims and the innocent buyers. Calm down, everyone, said William. Let's sort this out calmly. How am I supposed to sort it out? Asked Michael. I invested all my savings in that ranch. And I lost my family's land, retorted Helen. Brian realized the situation was getting out of control. "Guys, maybe it's better if we seek legal help to resolve all this." "I agree," said Christine. "This situation is too complex for us to handle here." But William had a different proposal. "What if we tried to sort this out among ourselves first?" he suggested. "How so?" asked Michael. "Everyone sit down, let's talk like civilized people," said William. "Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone." William's idea was ambitious, but it made sense. Instead of turning to fights and long legal processes, perhaps they could find a way to repair the damages through dialogue and goodwill. "I'll get water for everyone," offered Margaret. "And I'll get chairs," added Christine. In a few minutes, the yard was set up like an impromptu assembly. All of Richard's victims were present, along with some of the buyers who had acquired the fraudulent properties. "Let's do it like this," began William. "Each one tells their story, and then we think of solutions." The first to speak was Helen. She told about her husband's illness, the pressure to sell the ranch, and the suffering the family went through after discovering they had been deceived. "Our ranch had been in the family for 4 generations, she said, emotional. "It was all we had." Next, Mr. Fisher told a similar story. Richard had convinced him and his wife to sell a small property by claiming debts that didn't exist. "We worked our whole lives to buy that land," he said, "and we lost everything because of his lies." Each story was sadder than the last. Entire families had been destroyed by Richard's frauds. "And you, Michael?" asked William. "Tell your version." Michael explained that he had bought Helen's ranch in good faith, investing all his savings in the business. "Richard showed me all the documents," he said. "Everything seemed legal." "And did you know the price was very low?" asked Helen. "I did, but Richard said it was because you needed to sell quickly due to debts," replied Michael. "Debts that didn't exist," reminded Brian. The situation was truly complex. Everyone had been harmed by Richard's actions, but in different ways. "What do you have to say about all this?" William asked Richard. I did many wrong things," he admitted. "And I don't know how to fix everything." "At least you're admitting it," said Mrs. Smith. "Admitting is not enough," added Mr. Fisher. "We want our lands back." "But what about the people who bought the lands?" asked Margaret. "They're victims too, it was true. Buyers like Michael had also been deceived by Richard, though in different ways." "Maybe we can think of a solution that helps everyone," suggested Christine. "What kind of solution?" asked Helen. Brian, who had studied similar cases in college, had an idea. "What if we created some kind of cooperative?" he suggested. "How so?" asked Michael. "The properties could be managed jointly, with profits divided between the original owners and the buyers," explained Brian. The idea was interesting but complex. "Would that be legal?" asked Mr. Fisher. "It would be if everyone agreed," replied Brian. "It's a form of friendly reparation." "But I want my ranch back," insisted Helen. "And I want to recover my investment," said Michael. The tension was returning. Each had different needs and expectations. "Folks," intervened William, "maybe we can't solve everything today, but at least now everyone knows the truth." "And that's already a start," added Margaret. Duke, who had remained quiet during the entire discussion, stood up and walked to the center of the group. The dog looked at each person as if assessing the situation. "Even the dog is worried," observed Christine. "Duke knows when there's tension in the air," said William. The dog approached Richard and stared at him. For a moment, the two looked at each other in silence. "I think even Duke is judging me," murmured Richard. "Maybe he is," said William. "Animals sense these things." The observation eased the tension a bit. Several people smiled, despite the gravity of the situation. "Shall we take a break?" suggested Margaret. "I've prepared a simple lunch for everyone." The idea was well received. Sometimes a shared meal can help ease conflicts. "I accept," said Helen. "Thank you for your hospitality." "It's the least I can do," replied Margaret, "considering everything my husband did." During lunch, the conversations were more relaxed. People began to get to know each other better, sharing other stories from their lives beyond the frauds. "You know," Helen said to Michael, "you seem like a good person. I'm not angry with you." "Thank you," replied Michael. "I really didn't know anything." "We know," said Mr. Fisher. "There's only one person to blame." Everyone looked at Richard, who was eating quietly, clearly embarrassed. "Dad," said Brian, "you need to say something." Richard put his fork down on the plate and looked at the group. "I know what I did was terrible," he began, "and I know that apologizing won't fix anything." "At least it's a start," said William. "But I want to try to make things right," continued Richard. "I don't know how, but I want to try." "How do you plan to do that?" asked Helen. "First, I'll return all the properties that are still in my name," said Richard. "How many are there?" asked Mr. Fisher. "3," replied Richard. "The others I've already resold." "And what about the ones that were resold?" asked Mrs. Smith. "I'll have to work to reimburse everyone," said Richard. "That will take years," observed Michael. "Then it will take years," replied Richard. "It's my responsibility." Richard's attitude was surprising everyone. For the first time, he seemed genuinely remorseful and willing to make amends for his mistakes. "How will we know you won't run away?" asked Helen. "I'll keep an eye on him," offered Brian. "I'm his son, but I won't protect him if he tries to shirk responsibility." "And so will I," added Christine. The assurance from his children brought some relief to the group. At least there were people willing to ensure that Richard kept his promises. After lunch, the group gathered again in the yard. The atmosphere was less tense, but there was still much to be resolved. "Let's try to organize this in a practical way," said Brian. "First, we need to list all the affected properties and identify which ones can be returned immediately," added Christine. "And which will require financial reimbursement," completed William. The organization work took several hours. Each case was unique, with its particularities and complexities. "This case here is complicated," said Brian, examining the Smiths' documents. "The property has been resold 3 times since it left your hands." "Does that mean we won't recover it?" asked Mrs. Smith. "Not necessarily," replied Brian, "but it will be more difficult." Duke started getting restless again, but this time he wasn't sniffing the ground. He was looking toward the road as if expecting someone. "More people are coming," said William. He was right. 2 more cars were approaching the property. "How many people did Richard deceive?" asked Christine, incredulous. The new visitors were more of Richard's victims, who had learned about the discoveries through the area's informal communication network. "Good afternoon," said an elderly lady, getting out of the first car. "I'm Constance Oliver. I came here because I heard that someone finally uncovered the truth about Richard Thompson." The second car brought a middle-aged couple, the Andersons, who had also been deceived. "This has turned into an assembly," observed Margaret. "It's just that many people were harmed," said Constance. The arrival of more victims made it clear that the problem was even bigger than they had imagined. Richard had operated for years, systematically deceiving rural families throughout the region. "How many of us are there now?" asked Helen. Brian did a quick count. "With the new people, there are 8 families present," he said. "And in the documents we found, there are records of at least 12 more," added Christine. 20 families, murmured William. "That's a lot of people." The scale of the problem was frightening even Richard, who seemed not to have realized the extent of his actions. "I didn't imagine I had affected so many people," he said. "How could you not imagine?" asked Constance, indignant. "You knew exactly what you were doing." "I knew I was deceiving people," admitted Richard. "But I didn't think about the impact it had on the families." "Didn't think or didn't want to think?" asked Mr. Anderson. The question was pertinent. Richard had chosen to ignore the consequences of his actions so he could continue profiting from them. "Maybe I didn't want to think," he admitted. "It was easier to pretend I was just doing business." "Business based on lies," said Mrs. Anderson. The afternoon was advancing, and the group was tired from the discussions, but there was still much to be resolved. "Everyone," said William, "I think we've talked enough for today. How about we meet again tomorrow?" "Good idea," agreed Helen. "It gives everyone time to process everything that's been uncovered." "And to think about practical solutions," added Brian. The group agreed to meet again the next day. Each family would take the documents related to their case to study them better. "Mr. William," said Constance before leaving, "thank you for opening your home to us." "You're welcome, Mrs. Constance," replied William. "After all, we're all in the same boat." "A boat sunk by the same man," she added, looking at Richard. After the visitors left, the Thompson family was alone with William in the turned-over yard. The 8 boxes were still there, silent witnesses to the day's revelations. "And now?" asked Margaret. "Now we start working to repair the damages," said Brian. "It will take years," observed Christine. "Then it will take years," repeated William. "The important thing is to do the right thing." Duke approached William and lay down at his feet. The dog seemed exhausted after 2 days of digging and revealing secrets. "You were a good boy, Duke," said William, petting the animal. "Anthony would be proud." "Your brother was a wise man," said Margaret. "He really was," agreed William. "And forward-thinking. He knew that one day the truth would be necessary." Night was falling again. William looked at his house, which would soon be truly his again. "Tomorrow you'll move into the small room," he said to the Thompsons. "Thank you for your generosity," said Margaret. "It's the least I can do," replied William. "After all, you're also victims of Richard in a way." Richard, who had remained silent for the last few minutes, finally spoke. "William, I don't deserve your kindness." "Maybe not," agreed William, "but your children and your wife deserve a chance to start over." "Dad," said Brian, "you're lucky to have found someone like Mr. William." "I am," admitted Richard, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that luck." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle. This time it was an official car with the City Hall emblem. "Now what?" asked Christine, worried. A man in a suit got out of the car and introduced himself as a City Hall employee. "Good evening," he said. "Are you Mr. William Peterson?" "Yes, I am," replied William, nervous. "We received information about irregularities in rural property documents involving Mr. Richard Thompson," said the employee. The group exchanged glances. Someone had reported the situation to the authorities. "Who made the report?" asked Brian. "I can't reveal that," replied the employee. "But I need to examine the documents that were found." William showed the boxes and their contents. The employee examined everything carefully, taking notes. "This is a very serious situation," he said. "We'll need a formal investigation." "What does that mean?" asked Margaret. "So it means the case will be reviewed by the competent authorities," explained the employee. Richard was pale. The arrival of the authorities made the situation official and irreversible. "Mr. Thompson," said the employee, "you'll need to give a statement about these accusations." "When?" asked Richard. "Tomorrow morning," replied the employee. "At City Hall." After giving the necessary instructions, the employee left, taking copies of some important documents. "Now it's serious," said Brian. "It was already serious before," reminded Christine. "But now it's official," added Margaret. William was worried about the direction things were taking. "Did I do the right thing by agreeing to resolve this amicably?" he asked. "You did," replied Brian. "At least this way the families have a chance to recover something." "If it were only through official channels, it would take years to resolve," added Christine. Duke was restless again, but this time not because of buried secrets. The dog seemed to sense the tension of the people around him. "Calm down, Duke," said William. "The hard part is over." "Is it really over?" asked Margaret. "The discovery of the truth is over," replied William. "Now comes the part of dealing with the consequences." The family spent the night talking about the next steps. Richard was visibly nervous about the prospect of being questioned by the authorities. "Dad, you have to tell them the truth," said Brian. "What if I get arrested?" asked Richard. "Then you'll be arrested," replied Christine. "It's the consequence of your actions. But if you cooperate and try to repair the damages, it might be lighter," added Brian. William was tired but satisfied. After months of confusion and sadness, he finally knew the truth about what had happened to his property. "Anthony," he murmured, looking at the starry sky. "Thank you for taking care of me even after you were gone." Duke approached and rested his head on William's leg. The dog seemed to understand that its mission had been accomplished, but its presence was still needed to comfort its owner. "Let's go to sleep," said William. "Tomorrow will be a long day." The next morning, Richard went to City Hall to give his statement. Brian accompanied him, both for moral support and to ensure he told the truth. Meanwhile, the affected families began gathering again at William's farm. The news that authorities were involved had spread quickly. "What now?" asked Helen. "Do we have to wait for the official investigation?" Not necessarily, replied Christine. We can keep trying to resolve some situations on our own. William had spent the night thinking about a proposal for the group. I have an idea, he said. How about we create an association? What kind of association? Asked Mr. Fisher. A Victims of Rural Fraud Association, explained William, to help each other and prevent others from going through the same thing. The idea was well received. By joining forces, the families would have a better chance of recovering their losses and helping others in similar situations. I support it, said Helen. Me too, added Constance. Within a few hours, the association was formally established. William was chosen as president, both for being the first to discover the fraud and for his conciliatory attitude. Our first task, he said, is to catalogue all the cases and see which ones can be resolved more quickly. The work was immense, but the group was determined. Each family brought all the documents they had, and Christine helped organize everything systematically. Some cases will be easier than others, she observed. The important thing is not to give up on any of them, said William. In the late afternoon, Brian and Richard returned from City Hall. Richard was dejected, but Brian seemed optimistic. How did it go? Asked Margaret. Dad confessed everything, said Brian, and he committed to cooperating with the investigation. And the consequences? Asked Christine. They're still to be determined, replied Brian, but the fact that he's cooperating and trying to make amends might help. Richard approached the group gathered in the yard. Everyone, he said, I want to apologize to all of you once again, and I want to say that I'll do everything in my power to repair the damage I've caused. Words are easy, said Mr. Fisher. We want to see actions. You will, promised Richard, starting tomorrow. Duke, who had observed the whole scene, got up and walked over to Richard. The dog stared at him for a moment, as if assessing his sincerity. I think even Duke is giving you a second chance, said William. I hope to deserve it, replied Richard. The day was ending, but the work was just beginning. The association had a lot ahead of them, but they also had hope. Tomorrow we start working for real, William told the group. And we'll keep going until we get justice for everyone, added Helen. Justice and restitution, completed Brian. Duke barked once, as if agreeing. The dog had fulfilled its mission of revealing the truth, but now it was part of a bigger mission, rebuilding what had been destroyed. The story of fraud and discovery was far from over, but at least now there was hope. And sometimes, hope is all people need to start over. The following week was filled with hard work for everyone involved. The association met daily at William's farm, organizing documents, planning actions, and supporting each other. Richard, keeping his promise, worked tirelessly to begin making amends. He transferred the 3 properties that were still in his name back to their original owners. It's a start, said Helen, who was one of the beneficiaries. But there's still a long way to go, reminded Mr. Fisher, whose case was more complicated. Brian graduated in law and decided to specialize in rural fraud cases. His first action was to represent all of his father's victims free of charge. It's the least I can do, he said. Christine abandoned her studies in New York and returned to the region to help manage the association. She had a talent for organization and soon became indispensable. I never imagined I'd be doing this kind of work, she told William. Life sometimes takes us down paths we didn't expect, he replied. Margaret decided to separate from Richard, but kept in touch to support their children and help with the reparation process. I can't live with him anymore, she explained, but I won't abandon my responsibility to help the victims. 3 months after the initial discoveries, the association had managed to recover or compensate 8 of the 20 affected properties. It was significant progress, but there was still much work ahead. We're on the right track, said William during an association meeting. Slowly but surely, agreed Helen. Duke remained the unofficial mascot of the association. The dog had become famous in the region as the dog who uncovered the truth, and many people came to visit him. He should get a medal, joked Constance. He already has, replied William. The affection of all of us. The story spread beyond the region, attracting the attention of journalists and researchers interested in rural fraud cases. William gave some interviews, always emphasizing the importance of unity among the victims. "Alone, we were weak," he said in an interview. "Together, we became strong." 1 year after the discoveries, the association had become a national reference in preventing and combating rural fraud. They had created a prevention manual that was distributed free of charge to small producers. "Anthony would be proud," said William, looking at a photo of his brother he had placed in the association's headquarters. Duke, now a bit older but still active, remained the symbol of perseverance and the search for truth. "Without him, none of this would have happened," said Christine, petting the dog. "He only did what Anthony taught him," replied William. "Protect the family." Richard kept his promise to repair the damages, working tirelessly to compensate all the victims. It took 5 years, but he succeeded. During this period, he became an advocate for honesty in rural business, using his experience to warn others about the dangers of greed. "I learned that true wealth isn't what you accumulate," he said in a lecture to rural producers, "but the respect you earn." Brian became a respected lawyer, specializing in agricultural law and defending small producers. Christine founded an NGO that offers free legal assistance to vulnerable rural families. "Our father committed terrible crimes," said Brian in an interview, "but his downfall taught us the value of justice and reparation." Margaret remarried to an honest man who supported her in her work with the association. She became the organization's treasurer and one of the main advocates for the rights of elderly rural residents. "I discovered that I can build something good from something bad," she said. 2 years later, Duke passed away peacefully in his sleep at William's feet. The old farmer organized a simple but moving funeral for the dog who had changed so many lives. "He fulfilled his mission," said William, placing flowers on the small grave he built in the yard. The association continued to grow and help families throughout the country. The yard where it all began became a symbol of hope and justice, visited by people from all over Brazil. William, now 78 years old, continued to preside over the association, but was already preparing his succession. Helen had become vice president and was ready to take over the leadership. "Will you continue the work?" he asked her. "Yes, I will," Helen replied. "It's what we owe to those who still need help." "And to Anthony," William added, "and to Duke." On the 5th anniversary of the discoveries, the association organized a big party at William's farm. Hundreds of people attended, including many families who had been helped over the years. "5 years ago, I was alone and desperate," William said in his speech. "Today, I have a huge family of people who care for each other." "And it all started with a dog digging in the yard," Helen added, prompting laughter and applause. "No," William corrected. "It all started with a brother who loved me enough to protect me, even after he was gone." The speech was moving, but the most touching moment of the party was when they discovered one last surprise from Anthony. One of Constance's daughters, who was a veterinarian, had found a microchip implanted in Duke years before his death. "The chip contains a recorded message," she explained. "From whom?" William asked. "From Anthony," she replied, "recorded shortly before he died." With trembling hands, William listened to his brother's last message. "William, if you're hearing this, it's because Duke has fulfilled his mission. He was trained not only to find the boxes, but also to bring people together. I knew you couldn't face Richard alone, but I knew that together with other victims, you would be invincible. Duke wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol of the unity you needed to find. Take care of him. Take care of each other, and remember, the truth always wins, even when it seems buried forever." There wasn't a dry eye at the party. Anthony's wisdom and love had transcended his own death, creating something much bigger than he could have imagined. "He knew," William murmured. "He knew that Duke would bring us together." "And unite us forever," Helen added. The party continued into the night, but the true meaning of that moment was forever etched in the hearts of all present. They weren't just victims who had found justice, but a family that had discovered the power of unity and perseverance. William spent his last years caring for the association and telling the story of Duke to children in the area. He died at 82, sleeping peacefully in his own bed. in the house he had recovered thanks to the loyalty of a dog and the wisdom of a brother. His funeral was huge, with hundreds of people who had been touched by his story. Helen took over as president of the association, as planned, and continued the work with the same dedication. "William and Duke are together again," she said at the cemetery, "and Anthony can finally rest in peace, knowing that his family is protected." The story of the farmer's ranch became a legend in the region, passed down from generation to generation as an example that truth, justice, and love always find a way, even when they seem impossible. And in the yard of the old farm, which was now the association's headquarters, a simple statue of an old man and his faithful dog reminded all visitors that sometimes the greatest heroes are those who never give up doing what's right, even when the whole world seems against them. The statue's plaque simply said, "In memory of William Peterson, Duke, and Anthony Peterson, who taught us that buried truth always finds a way to bloom." And below, in smaller letters, "Family isn't just who we're born with, but who chooses to stay with us when the truth finally comes to light." End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this moving story of overcoming injustice. Do you believe William made the right decisions by forgiving and even helping those who wronged him? Share your honest opinions in the comments about this beautiful lesson of unity and perseverance. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other touching stories like this one.